Lucas, Lucky. Crawford fought to keep his eyelids from drooping as Trade Minister Devine rambled endlessly about the complex paperwork required to move methane-based dairy products across sector borders. The alien's 6 mouthparts produced a series of clicks and whistles, all perfectly in tune with the bureaucratic rhythm, matching the absolute monotony of the topic. According to subsection 47B of the newly revised Guidelines for Perishable Goods Transport, all methane-based dairy products were required to be accompanied by no fewer than 12 distinct forms, each signed in triplicate by a certified methane dairy transportation specialist. Lucky subtly glanced at his augmented reality display, which kindly informed him that it was only minute 47 of the minister's planned 180-minute speech. He looked around the enormous council chamber, taking in the sight of hundreds of alien representatives in various stages of attention. The Thrixians, true to their species' name, were already deep into their backup survival sleep mode. The Fasari had split themselves into individual atoms to escape the unbearable boredom. Even the hyper-aware Verini had reduced their eye count to the bare minimum required by Council protocol. Council President Ixel, a massive gelatinous blob of what might have been importance, floated around in what could have been approval, or maybe just simple osmotic regulation. It was impossible to tell with the Kelsey. Their species communicated entirely through subtle shifts in their jiggle patterns, making them incredibly skilled politicians but dreadful dinner guests. Lucky had earned his nickname due to his knack for landing the most comfortable diplomatic assignments in the galaxy. But today, as he sat through the 27th appendix to the Methane Dairy Guidelines, he couldn't shake the feeling that his luck might finally be running dry. Point of clarification, interrupted Counselor Darren Blackwell of the Drethian Collective, their crystalline body reflecting light in the universal pattern that indicated bureaucratic excitement. Shouldn't we first establish a subcommittee to determine whether the current definition of DAR adequately includes non-railcore milk products? The chamber erupted in a symphony of high-level diplomatic jargon, which, to an untrained ear, might have sounded like an unorganized zoo during feeding time. Lucky took advantage of the chaos to send a quick message to Admiral Mia Slipstream Jordan. Operation Milk Run going according to plan. The Council is completely absorbed by dairy regulations. No one has noticed the fleet yet. The reply came almost immediately. Perfect. 12 more colony ships slipped through during Zypher's opening remarks. Keep them distracted with cheese paperwork. Lucky grinned and raised all 3 of his translator appendages in the formal gesture of interspecies culture and sophistication. I believe humanity's experience with traditional two-dimensional dairy documentation could provide some useful insights into this matter. The chamber fell quiet. If there was one thing the Galactic Council loved more than making new regulations, it was listening to humanity's quaint, primitive approach to bureaucracy. They found it charming, like watching a toddler struggle with quantum mechanics. President Ixel's surface rippled, and the protocol droids translated it as, "The Council acknowledges the human representative and appreciates their sincere, if technologically limited, desire to contribute to this crucial discussion." Lucky adjusted his tie, straightened his human diplomatic translator Mark V badge, and dove into a detailed proposal for a new dairy product classification system, one that would undoubtedly require at least 6 more emergency sessions to fully debate. As he spoke, he observed with carefully hidden amusement as various species representatives began forming spontaneous alliances and opposition groups. Humans had learned long ago that in galactic politics, the best strategy was to be underestimated. While the Council wasted years discussing the proper form numbers for yogurt transport, humanity quietly built the 3rd largest trading fleet in known space. And while the more sophisticated species argued about the proper definition of semi-solid dairy colloids, human colonies had inadvertently spread across dozens of resource-rich systems. And that, esteemed colleagues, Lucky concluded after 3 hours, is why I believe we must first establish a preliminary fact-finding commission to investigate the potential impact of zero-gravity cheese aging on the requirements of Form 47B subsection. Once again, the chamber erupted into sophisticated diplomatic chaos. Lucky leaned back, adjusted his primitive digital tablet, and sent another quick message to Admiral Jordan. "They've taken the bait. How many ships did we get through this time?" The reply almost made him break character. 27, plus we've begun construction on 3 new starbases while they were busy arguing about cheese. I love this job. Just another day at the Galactic Council, where humanity was still the cute new species that needed help filling out their forms. Lucky checked his schedule for tomorrow. Extended emergency debate. The impact of non-Neonian ice cream on trade route documentation. Perfect. This would just about cover the new battlecruiser deployment. The crisis began, as many galactic incidents do, during the Council's mandatory 7th lunch break. Lucky was enjoying his synthesized coffee when Maximilian Squeak Harris, a junior analyst from the Regulatory Compliance Division, accidentally spilled their 8th appendage's beverage all over their data tablet. In their panic to clean up, they grabbed what they thought was a napkin, but it was actually Lucky's authentic Earth restaurant menu. A clever piece of propaganda he used to distract council members during sensitive votes. As they wiped the screen, the holographic overlay flickered, revealing the true contents, classified shipping manifests showing human vessels in forbidden sectors of space. "Oh my 7 sons!" Maximilian squeaked. Harris whistled through their respiratory tubes. "These aren't pizza delivery routes at all." Lucky maintained a perfectly practiced look of innocent confusion. "Oh, that old thing? Must be a glitch in our primitive mapping software. You know how humans struggle with basic spatial navigation." He reached for the tablet, but Maximilian Squeak Harris's 8 appendages were surprisingly quick. When they weren't juggling multiple beverages, these were military-grade transport signatures in the restricted Xelon cluster and the protected nexus of eternal bureaucratic processing. And is that a human supply depot in the sacred void of untaxable commerce? Would you believe we got lost repeatedly in the most strategically valuable areas? Lucky flashed his most disarming smile. "You know us humans, always taking the wrong turn at Beetlejuice." But it was too late. Maximilian Squeak Harris had already triggered the emergency protocol for suspected regulatory violations, a move that meant the next scheduled lunch break would be delayed by up to 7 minutes. In the world of galactic bureaucracy, nothing screamed crisis louder. Within hours, the council chamber had gone from its usual state of dignified monotony to one of mild distress. President Ixel's surface ripples were now at Category 2 perturbation levels. Trade Minister JX's mouthparts were so agitated they were producing audible clicks. The Thrixians had even woken up. "Explain this at once," demanded High Counselor Isabella Hayes of the Paperwork Confederation, waving all 17 of their signing appendages in frustration. The chamber's holographic displays showed hundreds of human ships, bases, and colonies in restricted space. "How did you manage this level of expansion without filing the proper forms?" Isabella Hayes demanded. Lucky cleared his throat and adopted his most professional tone. "Well, you see, there's been a bit of confusion. According to our records, we did file all the necessary forms. Form 62XX, Form 89Y for accidental resource extraction, and of course the ever-popular Form 123Z, the retroactive permission request for ships that got lost due to outdated map data." Admiral Jordan's hologram flickered to life next to him, her expression a perfect blend of apologetic and genuinely confused. "We're still getting the hang of your advanced regulatory procedures. Did we use last cycle's forms? Should we have submitted them in 4 dimensions instead of 3? We're happy to resubmit everything with the proper quantum signatures." The council chamber exploded into sophisticated chaos. The Virillians reassembled their atomic structure in sheer outrage. The Varinii manifested additional eyes just to roll them in disbelief. "But these are clearly military installations," Maximilian Squeak Harris objected, their analysis algorithms now teetering on dangerously close to actual insight. "Military?" Lucky chuckled. "Oh no, those are just heavily armed trading posts for, aggressive bargaining. And those aren't battle cruisers, just very enthusiastic diplomatic vessels. It says so right here on Form 47B under Purpose of Installation. Peaceful trading station with completely coincidental defensive capabilities." "And the planetary-scale mining operations?" Isabella Hayes demanded with an eyebrow raised. "Would you believe we were looking for space whales?" Lucky said with a grin. "We heard they're endangered. We're deeply concerned about conservation, you see. That's why we had to build those 40 orbital defense platforms, to protect the whales from space pirates or meteors, whichever sounds more plausible. This is unprecedented! President Ixel's surface ripples intensified so dramatically that 3 junior Eridani had to be treated for motion sickness. Humanity has expanded into restricted space without following the proper procedures. Actually, Lucky interjected, pulling out another tablet. According to Section 7, Paragraph 18, Subclause 23 of the Emergency Provisions for Accidental Colonization, all our expansions are technically legal. We filed Form 404, Documentation Not Found, which automatically triggers Form 303, Temporary Permission Pending Review, which in turn activates the little-known Form 202, Permanent Registration of Temporary Structures that have been there too long to move. The chamber went silent, as hundreds of species tried to process the revelation that humanity had somehow weaponized bureaucratic incompetence. Admiral Jordan smiled brightly. We've also prepared 67,000 pages of supporting documentation, which, according to Council Procedure 89C, must be reviewed in its entirety before any action can be taken. Shall I begin reading it aloud? I believe it must be done in all 15,000 currently recognized galactic languages. The silence deepened, the Council now facing their worst nightmare. Humans who had mastered the art of gaming the system. Lucky's communicator buzzed quietly with another message from the fleet. Operation Paperwork Paradise proceeding as planned. Established 3 new colonies while you were explaining our clerical errors. By the way, we're planning to accidentally annex the Celestial Archives next week. You might want to start filling out those wrong turn forms now. He smiled and raised his hand, signaling for attention. While we're all gathered here, I have some exciting proposals about streamlining the process for accidental first contact scenarios. I've prepared a modest 12,000 slides. The Thrixians immediately returned to hibernation. This was going to be a very long day. Maximilian Squeak. Harris, after 3 straight solar cycles of processing human diplomatic records, had never been so thrilled in their entire analytical career. The fact that they'd gone through 17 stimulant patches and were now seeing quantum probability waves didn't matter. What mattered was the pattern they had discovered, now clearly playing out across their holographic display. Don't you see? They chittered excitedly to the Emergency Committee for Human Regulatory Compliance, their appendages vibrating at frequencies that might be deemed concerning by medical professionals. Every single human expansion follows the exact same pattern. The committee members stirred, finally pulled out of their bureaucratic stupor. Even President Ixel's protoplasm shifted slightly, though that might have just been gas. First, Maximilian Squeak Harris displayed a series of diplomatic records. Humans send what they call exploratory vessels into restricted space. When caught, they apologize profusely, claiming their primitive navigation systems malfunctioned. High Counselor Isabella Hayes's signing appendages twitched in recognition. Yes, we all remember the infamous sorry, we thought that was Jupiter incident. Maximilian Squeak. Harris's excitement grew as they continued, their glands working overtime. While we're processing their apology, they established temporary emergency shelters for their lost crews. By the time we finish the paperwork for the navigation violation, those shelters have somehow turned into full colonies with historical preservation status. Trade Minister Zypher's mouthparts clicked in frustration. Like the human historical site of New Cleveland, established just last week? Exactly, Maximilian Squeak, Harris exclaimed. And here's the key part. They displayed a massive chart of hundreds of human diplomatic messages. Every single expansion follows the same pattern. Human documents always begin with, "We come in peace," Maximilian Squeak, Harris declared, their voice rising with palpable excitement. Every single one of them. Well, that's good, isn't it? Asked a junior council member, their species still struggling with the concept of patterns. It shows they mean no harm. No! Maximilian Squeak Harris's appendages trembled at frequencies known to interfere with certain psychic species. Can't you see? They never mention anything about leaving in peace. The chamber erupted in gasps of shock. followed by the immediate formation of 3 subcommittees tasked with investigating the grammatical implications of this discovery. Meanwhile, in his office, Lucky was going over the latest accidental expansion reports with Admiral Jordan's hologram. Jordan flashed a grin. "So, how did they like our apology for accidentally building a quantum shipyard in the restricted zone of endless permits?" "Oh, they loved it," Lucky replied, "especially the part where we offered to dismantle it as soon as they approved the demolition permits. You know, according to their regulations, that requires an environmental impact study, which takes longer than the heat death of the universe. And they bought it. They're still arguing over whether to process our apology with Form 89X or 89Y. By the time they decide, we'll have accidentally built 6 more shipyards." Jordan's hologram flickered briefly as she checked her data feeds. "Speaking of accidents," she said, "you'll never guess what our exploration fleet just discovered in the bureaucratic exclusion zone." "Let me guess," Lucky said, smirking. "Another vital strategic location we'll apologize profusely for discovering?" "A whole system of habitable planets rich in rare elements," Jordan said with a pause for dramatic effect, "which we've already claimed as a temporary emergency refueling station while we figure out where Earth is." Lucky raised an eyebrow. "And of course, you've already submitted the preliminary apology in triplicate?" "Of course," Jordan replied, her tone full of amusement. Lucky picked up his diplomatic incident folder, now so thick it seemed to have its own gravitational pull. "Which excuse should we use this time? Our GPS was infected by space pirates, or a quantum space whale hijacked our navigation system?" "I was thinking something more classic," Jordan said with a mischievous grin. "We're terribly sorry, but our maps were accidentally printed upside down." "That's perfect. I'll schedule an emergency session to apologize personally. We'll have plenty of time to establish mining operations before anyone realizes those aren't actually refueling stations." Back in the council chamber, Maximilian "Squeak" Harris's presentation reached its dramatic peak. They pointed at another holographic display, their appendages trembling with the force of revelation. Humans claimed they established a military base in the sacred void because... Maximilian "Squeak" Harris paused for effect. "Someone forgot to carry the 2 when calculating fuel requirements." "But surely," protested another council member. "They removed the base once the error was discovered. They filed a request for a base removal permit, which requires approval from the Committee of Permanent Temporary Structures, which can't meet because humans accidentally built their vacation resort on the committee's meeting chamber." President Ixel's surface rippled with what could only be described as genuine concern, a rare occurrence that triggered emergency protocols in 3 nearby sectors. "Are you suggesting?" Ixel's translator struggled to interpret the complex ripple patterns. "That humanity's apparent bureaucratic incompetence might be intentional?" Before Maximilian "Squeak" Harris could respond, Lucky's voice rang through the chamber's announcement system. "Esteemed council members, I apologize for the interruption, but I must report another tragic navigational error. It seems our latest exploration fleet accidentally discovered a cluster of strategic resources while trying to find the nearest space coffee shop. We've submitted the standard apology forms, along with a request for temporary emergency mining permits. All 990,000 pages of supporting documentation are ready for your immediate review." The council collectively groaned. Maximilian "Squeak" Harris's analytical resolve finally gave out, and they collapsed into a puddle of pure bureaucratic despair. In Lucky's office, another message flashed across his screen. "Operation Whoops. How did that get there is proceeding ahead of schedule. Should have control of the entire sector by next Tuesday. Don't forget to file our apology for accidentally annexing it while looking for a parking spot." Lucky smiled and began preparing his next briefing. The tragic consequences of reversed plus and minus signs in spatial coordinates. A human apology in several volumes. Sometimes, Lucky thought with a wry smile, the best way to succeed in galactic politics is to fail upward, gracefully. The emergency session of the council was interrupted by the arrival of Bob Technically Correct Scott, humanity's chief legal representative. He burst through the chamber doors, pulling 17 anti-grav carts loaded with documents, followed by a small army of clerical drones. "My deepest apologies for the dramatic entrance," Bob said, straightening his tie. "The drones got lost 3 times on the way here. Our primitive guidance systems, you understand. Would anyone like to file an incident report about the door? President Ixel's surface ripples showed barely contained frustration. Human legal representative Scott, Ixel said, the council has summoned you to address serious concerns regarding your species' administrative irregularities. Wonderful, Bob beamed, pulling out a tablet. I've prepared a comprehensive response to these concerns, complete with citations from all relevant regulatory frameworks. Shall we begin with Volume 1, A Brief History of Spatial Navigation Errors in Human History, or skip straight to Volume 17? Why getting lost in restricted space is technically legal if you fill out Form 394B first. High Counselor Isabella Hayes slammed all 17 signing appendages onto their podium. Enough! We have evidence of systematic exploitation of regulatory loopholes. Maximilian Squeak Harris, now running on their 23rd stimulant patch, projected a galaxy map showing human expansion patterns. Red dots were scattered across the map, indicating human accidents. The display looked like someone had spilled a bottle of red wine over the most strategically valuable locations in known space. Ah yes, Bob nodded sagely, our unfortunate series of navigational mishaps. Would you believe our star charts were accidentally printed in Comic Sans? These are not mishaps. Maximilian Squeak Harris vibrated intensely. Look at the pattern. Every accidental colony is strategically positioned along major trade routes. Every lost fleet, Bob said, continuing his diplomatic tour de force, somehow ends up conveniently near strategic resources. Every temporary base is, of course, built in perfect defensive positions, and all of this is pure coincidence. Pure coincidence? Maximilian Squeak, Harris repeated, their appendages now vibrating with enough intensity to shake the room. Can't you see it? They've turned the system into their personal playground of paperwork errors. Unfazed, Bob pulled out yet another document. As clearly explained in our official report on human coincidence probability in relation to spatial navigation errors, Volume 23. Would anyone like a copy? It's only 12,000 pages per chapter. The council chamber erupted into sophisticated chaos. The Xenian tried to split their atoms yet again, only to discover that humans had accidentally built a containment field around their sector. Meanwhile, the Varini's eyes were spinning so rapidly, they seemed to be approaching relativistic speeds. And what about this? Isabella Hayes demanded, projecting another image onto the screen. Human mining operations in the sacred void of untaxable commerce. Bob adjusted his glasses with precision. Ah, yes, that's a simple misunderstanding. You see, in human language, sacred void of untaxable commerce could easily be misinterpreted as totally available mining zone. A common translation error, really. We've already filed Form 787X, Request for Linguistic Clarification. Retroactive permission for activity is already in progress. Meanwhile, Lucky, seated in his office and watching the chaos unfold on his screen, shared a virtual drink with Admiral Jordan. How's Bob doing? Jordan asked, raising her glass in an air of casual camaraderie. Brilliantly, Lucky replied. He's about to introduce his masterpiece, a 47p analysis on why the word restricted in restricted zone could technically be interpreted as a suggestion rather than a directive. Perfect, Jordan said, her smile widening. While they argue about semantics, we've accidentally completed 3 more starbases. Would you believe we built them while trying to parallel park? Back in the chamber, Bob was on a roll. Furthermore, he continued, pulling out yet another document, according to subparagraph 7 of the Emergency Provisions for Accidental Colonial Expansion, any settlement established due to navigational error gains provisional autonomy if the correction paperwork isn't processed within one standard galactic cycle. But no one ever needed that rule before, Vex muttered. Maximilian Squeak Harris, now operating at full analysis capacity, blurted out, "No other species has ever gotten lost enough times to create an empire." "I object to the word empire," Bob replied smoothly. "We prefer accidental association of temporarily permanent human settlements." He pulled out a 14,000-page document and held it up. "I have here a detailed explanation of why these terms are legally distinct. President Ixel's surface rippled so violently that nearby smaller species had to activate their gravity anchors. This is absurd! Ixel's translator struggled to keep up with the wave patterns. You can't build an interstellar civilization based on paperwork errors. Actually, Bob said, pulling out a well-worn copy of the original Council Charter, according to Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 18, line 456, we absolutely can, as long as we file Form 999, Notification of Intent to Accidentally Establish Dominion through Administrative Oversight, which, by the way, we did 3 cycles ago. It's probably still pending in your inbox. The chamber fell into stunned silence as thousands of species scrambled to check their message backlogs. Lucky's communicator buzzed again. Operation Oops. All Empire is proceeding as planned. By the way, we just accidentally annexed the Central Archives while looking for the bathroom. Don't worry. I've already submitted our apology in interpretive format as required by Section 45X of the Cultural Exchange Protocols. Lucky smiled, leaning back in his chair, preparing for the next phase. Sometimes the best defense is a good offensive amount of paperwork. The Council's attempt to restrict human expansion was like trying to convince a black hole to stop attracting matter. Within one standard cycle of implementing the new humans must double-check their navigation protocols rule, humanity had already accidentally established colonies in 17 previously uncharted sectors. But, Maximilian Squeak Harris began, their analysis glands working overtime, now fueled by synthetic stimulants banned in 47 systems. How did they manage to build a Dyson sphere while allegedly looking for a gas station? Lucky stood at the podium, maintaining his trademark expression of innocent confusion. Well, you see, he explained in a calm, measured tone, our primitive energy sensors mistook that star for a fusion-based fuel depot. By the time we realized our error, we'd already built the support structure. And according to Form 67X, don't say it. High Counselor Vex groaned in despair. Any construction project more than 12% complete automatically qualifies for historical preservation status under the Oops, too late to stop now clause. President Ixel's surface had developed what medical professionals were now calling bureaucracy-induced ripple syndrome. The translator struggled to interpret the complex wave pattern. This is unacceptable. Ixel's voice quivered. We've implemented 73 new regulations specifically to prevent human expansion. Ah, yes, Bob Williams stepped forward, casually pulling out another card of documents. I have here our official response to each of those new regulations, along with our interpretation of why they actually grant us additional rights under the principle of regulatory paradox. The Council Chamber's AI had to activate emergency ventilation as several species began emitting stress pheromones. For example, Bob continued, cheerfully flipping through the pages, your new rule requiring all human ships to file flight plans in advance? We've now submitted plans for every possible route through known space simultaneously. According to our calculations, we should finish submitting the paperwork sometime after the heat death of the universe. In the meantime, any route we take is technically pre-approved, pending final review. Admiral Jordan's hologram flickered again, this time wearing an expression of profound administrative concern. We're doing our best to comply with the new regulations. Just yesterday, we submitted Form 456Z, Request for Clarification on whether quantum superposition counts as being in restricted space. While we're waiting for a response, our ships exist in all possible locations simultaneously. Schrödinger sends his regards. The Virillians tried to split their atoms in protest, only to discover that humans had accidentally built quantum observation posts around every strategic location, effectively freezing all quantum states in their favor. And let's not forget, Lucky added helpfully, that according to the new requirement for multiple witnesses to verify navigation calculations, we've stationed human observers throughout restricted space, purely for regulatory compliance, of course. Of course. Jordan nodded seriously. We take rule following very seriously. That's why we've established emergency compliance monitoring stations in every sector. The fact that they're equipped with planetary-scale defensive systems is purely coincidental. Would anyone like to file a complaint about the heavily armed regulatory inspection teams? Lucky asked, his smile widening. Maximilian Squeak Harris's analysis suddenly sparked a major revelation. Wait. Are you saying you're using our own regulations to justify military occupation? Military occupation? Bob replied, raising an eyebrow. Of course not. We're just facilitating interstellar regulatory compliance. Bob gasped dramatically, placing a hand over his heart. No, no. These are administrative enforcement facilitation units. He gestured toward the holographic display, pointing at the heavily armed ships. See? It says so right here on Form 789C. Declaration of peaceful intent to station completely non-military personnel for regulatory purposes. But they have battleship-grade weapons. Someone from the back of the chamber exclaimed. Oh, those? Bob waved it off casually. Those are merely administrative tools for high-energy document processing. Very standard office equipment, really. Would anyone like to file a request for a demonstration? The chamber erupted into sophisticated panic as species scrambled to check their regulatory databases. The dreadful truth began to unfold. Humans hadn't broken any rules. They simply interpreted each rule exactly as written, not as intended. Lucky's communicator buzzed with another update from the fleet. Operation Malicious Compliance has achieved full spectrum dominance. We now control 30% of known space through carefully documented administrative errors. Should we accidentally annex the central archives while filing the paperwork to report our previous accidental annexations? This is impossible. President Ixel's surface ripples had reached perpendicularity, a sign of intense bureaucratic distress. No species can expand this quickly through legitimate means. Actually, Bob casually pulled out what appeared to be the original founding documents of the Galactic Council itself. According to Article 1, written 10,000 cycles ago, the Council is required to promote efficient administration of galactic resources. One might argue that by accidentally optimizing administrative processes through creative form interpretation, we are fulfilling the Council's primary directive. The Chamber's AI had to deploy emergency calming agents as several species simultaneously realized humanity had weaponized the very foundation of galactic civilization, the sacred art of paperwork. Lucky smiled, preparing for the next phase. A comprehensive analysis of why getting lost in strategically valuable locations is actually good for galactic efficiency. Sometimes, Lucky mused, the best way to win wasn't to break the rules, but to follow them so precisely that they broke themselves. The final emergency session of the Galactic Council began, and it would later be known as the Great Administrative Revelation. To humanity, however, it was just Tuesday. President Ixel's surface ripples had reached previously unknown patterns, causing 3 different species to evolve just to study them. Before we begin, Lucky announced to the chamber, I should report that our fleet accidentally conquered the celestial archives while trying to file an appeal against our previous accidental conquests. We've submitted Form 999Z, retroactive permission for ironic administrative takeovers. The chamber had passed beyond chaos and into a new state of being, one that required the invention of several new mathematical concepts to describe. The Thrixians had woken up only to immediately return to hibernation. The Varinii had developed square eyes from reviewing too many human submission forms. Admiral Jordan's hologram appeared, accompanied by a galactic map showing human-controlled space. It didn't look like territorial expansion at all, more like someone had played connect the dots with strategic locations while blindfolded. In the interest of administrative transparency, Jordan began, I feel obligated to report that we've just accidentally established control over 3 more sectors while attempting to file these reports about accidentally establishing control over other sectors. Enough! President Ixel's ripples had achieved sentience and were filing their own complaints. What is the true purpose behind all these accidents? Lucky and Bob exchanged a glance. The moment had finally arrived. Well, Lucky smiled, pulling out one final document. Let's review humanity's first contact package, shall we? The one we submitted when joining the council. He glanced at the chamber. Notice anything interesting about the opening line? Maximilian Squeak Harris, now running on their 47th stimulant patch and able to see through time, projected the document. We come in peace. Yes, Jordan's hologram grinned. We came in peace. We never said anything about leaving that way. Bob explained, pulling out the original human membership application. Every single document we submitted included that phrase, and according to Council Regulation 47B, All submitted documents become legally binding upon acceptance. The revelation hit the chamber like a supernova of administrative horror. Humanity hadn't just been exploiting loopholes, they'd created the biggest loophole of all with their very first words to the galactic community. By accepting our membership, Lucky continued cheerfully, you legally bound us to arrive peacefully, but there was no clause about what happens after arrival. Technically, we've fulfilled our only binding obligation. We came in peace. Everything after that was just creative administrative interpretation. The chamber erupted into sophisticated resignation as species finally realized they'd been outmaneuvered by the one thing they never expected, precisely followed regulations. But Maximilian Squeak Harris's analysis glands were now transcending normal space-time. You've taken control of nearly a third of known space through paperwork. Actually, Jordan's hologram checked the latest figures. It's closer to 40% now. We accidentally annexed another sector while explaining how we accidentally annexed the previous sectors. We've already submitted the apology forms in interpretive dance format, as required by Section 89C of the Cultural Exchange Protocols. President Ixel's surface had achieved perfect stillness, the bureaucratic equivalent of surrender. The translator struggled to interpret the absence of ripples. So, this was your plan all along? Ixel whispered. To conquer through compliance? Conquer is such an aggressive word, Lucky smiled. We prefer aggressive administrative optimization through creative regulatory interpretation. Besides, according to Form 123Z, which we filed on our first day of membership, any species achieving dominion through purely bureaucratic means is technically operating within Council guidelines. You've weaponized paperwork itself, Maximilian Squeak Harris whispered in horrified admiration. Oh no, Bob corrected, pulling out yet another document. According to the official definition in subsection 47X, these are clearly administrative enhancement tools for peaceful expansion through accidental competence. Would anyone like to file a complaint about our terminology? The chamber fell silent as species calculated how many forms they'd need to file to challenge humanity's interpretation of their own legal documents. Well then, Lucky said, straightening his tie. Since there are no formal objections, and according to Council Protocol 89Z, silence implies administrative consent. I believe we can now consider this matter fully resolved, Lucky said, his tone oozing with satisfaction. So who would like to review our proposal for streamlining galactic bureaucracy? I've prepared a modest 50,000 pages of suggested reforms. The Thrixians, never ones to miss an opportunity, sank into an even deeper state of hibernation, rendering themselves entirely unreachable. The Virillians, in an act of sheer existential avoidance, evolved beyond atomic structure, shedding the need for any further interactions with the paperwork nightmare. President Ixel's surface ripples reached an unprecedented state of quantum harmony, embodying the very essence of administrative surrender. And far away, in human space, a clerk diligently filed Form 1A, official recognition of successful peaceful conquest through aggressive paperwork, carefully marking it with humanity's traditional opening line. With a grin, the clerk took satisfaction in the process. After all, humanity had arrived in peace. They just never made any promises about how long they'd stay that way.